Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Hi there. Over the past 3 weeks that I've been doing YouTube, I've talked about quite a few powerful characters throughout Genshin's history, whether it be in passing when I talked about Dendro and Alhaitham, or made whole videos about meta breakers like Ganyu. Throughout the countless videos I've made, I've read every single comment, and quite a few of you have asked me when am I going to talk about Neuvillette, aka the favorite child, the one character in Genshin who is far and away more powerful by himself than entire team comps. To be honest with you, he was the first character I wanted to make the Meta Breaker series on because he is quite simply put so iconically, ridiculously overpowered. But I had to hold off because I knew Neuvillette was going to receive a massive buff in the near future in the form of Xilonen, which means now that she's finally out, it's time to talk about Neuvillette. But first, a little backstory. Fontaine, as a region, had a very high metric to fill when it came to the power scaling of its units, and this is entirely due to the fault of Dendro. I made a video about it if you're interested, but essentially, with the release of Dendro and the new powerful Hyper Bloom team comps, the main DPS per team rotation ended up increasing exponentially throughout Sumeru's release. To give you exact numbers, according to Kaching mains, the top meta teams during Sumeru's release did anywhere from 55 to 60k DPS per rotation. That is not damage per hit. That is damage per rotation, which takes the average amount of damage you deal in one rotation, calculated out in intervals of 20 seconds, and then it takes the average damage. That being said, the average meta teams that were not Hyper Bloom were the ones dealing 55 to 60k. Meanwhile, Hyper Bloom teams were doing 65 to 70k DPS a rotation. This was unusually high, but expected. With Sumeru being the region of Dendro, it is tradition for each region on release to buff its major element. However, with Dendro being the first element introduced after the game's release, it was a significantly more powerful element than the devs could have realized, resulting in future characters having to have their scaling upticked in order to compensate. Fontaine's region as a whole received a lot of characters that just did more than previous characters ever had, because it needed to. This isn't just for DPS, it also applies to supports of the region. They were simply more powerful and more versatile to help raise the medium average of all teams throughout Fontaine's release, and it succeeded for the most part. By the end of Fontaine's release, pretty much every team that was considered meta at the time evened out at around 65 to 70k DPS, which is, if you would remember, pretty much identical to that of Hyper Bloom. This is, of course, taking medium averages. If you were to increase hyper investment on your DPS teams, they would easily outperform Hyper Bloom due to having a higher ceiling. However, there was one team throughout the entire release of Fontaine that just performed above and beyond. And to those of you that read the title of the video, you know exactly who that one unit is. The unbiased Udex himself, Mr. Neuvillette, was easily the most ridiculously overpowered unit in the game. Would you believe me if I told you on release he actually wasn't that ridiculously overpowered? I know, it's hard to believe, right? Neuvillette on release, and he still is, a hyper carry DPS, which throughout Genshin's history haven't really had that great of a reputation. See characters like Sino, for example, and Zhao, especially because hyper carries were scarce throughout the release of Sumeru, so when people saw Neuvillette, they didn't really think much of it. But that's where Neuvillette kinda wins out. Unlike most of her hyper carries that want to scale off energy recharge, attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, elemental damage bonus, and whatever else they need for their kit, some characters need elemental mastery and what have you, Neuvillette didn't want all that, because Neuvillette is an HP scaling hydro hyper carry. This is a big deal. Typically, in Genshin, if a character scales off of HP, the damage multiplier is rather complex. It takes base HP, multiplies it by your attack percent, then multiplies it by your damage bonus, crit rate, crit damage, and so on and so forth. The exact multiplier is damage equals base damage times base damage multiplier plus additive base damage bonus multiplied by 1 plus base damage bonus minus enemy reduction target multiplied by your crit, then times by your enemy's default multipliers, then by enemy resistance multipliers, then finally by amplifying reactions such as vape. That is a lot of words that a lot of you didn't understand, but essentially, characters that scale off a lot of things end up scaling off a lot of things, which make them do less damage overall. Neuvillette doesn't have this problem because he only scales off HP, meaning the only things you need to worry about are your HP percent, your crit rate, your crit damage, your hydro bonus damage, and what your enemy's defensive stats are. Put that in even simpler terms, use an HP weapon, stack crit and hydro bonus damage, and put him on a team with Kazuha. Neuvillette, compared to every other character in Genshin's history, was ridiculously easy to build for the reasons I said before, but he also gets use of the new artifact set Hunters, which gives him 36 free crit rate. This means you get to easily stack crit damage, which means it's very, very easy to get your Neuvillette all the way up into 300 crit damage ranges, which, for Neuvillette, is very impressive because, like I said earlier, he scales off base HP, which is one of the best things to scale off of in Genshin. Every character in Genshin scales off HP, and the highest character HP you can get, assuming you're not really trying that hard, is somewhere around 20,000. But if you actually put effort into scaling your character based off HP, it is ridiculously easy to get all the way up to 33,000, 40,000, 50,000 even. Because of the modifiers I said earlier, all you need to do to figure out your Neuvillette's damage is take the percentage that the HP has, then multiply it by hydro bonus damage, crit rate, and crit damage. And because a well-built Neuvillette is easily getting up to 40,000 damage, a Neuvillette could easily be expected to hit around 30k per tick with no effort. But we're not done yet, because Neuvillette also receives damage bonuses from reacting with other elements, which, as a hyper carry, you kinda wanna do for something, say, like Viridescent Venerer Shred on Kazuha, which would increase his damage even more. You could also get vapes on Pyro NATO slashes, or you could use characters like Zhongli to cast a shield, get a crystallized proc, and boom, your Neuvillette is stronger. This means that Neuvillette is one of the easiest characters to build, both offensively and team comp wise, because he had so many options. Sucrose, Fischl, Kazuha, Zhangling, Zhongli, Baizhu, and hell, you can even put Tartaglia on the team, who would proc double Hydro, increasing your HP scaling, thus increasing your damage while also giving you +1 to charge attack talents for even more damage. On top of all of this, Neuvillette could heal, meaning you didn't actually need to have a healer on the team, because when Neuvillette casts his skill or his elemental burst, he receives these little blue balls that will heal him a significant amount of health back. So, if you wanted to, you could, in theory, completely forego a healer in order to push DPS even harder. And again, you need to remember, this is Neuvillette on release. Not long after, Neuvillette gained access to one of my favorite characters in the game, my C6 goat, Furina, who just makes him so much stronger, it's not even funny. With a team comp of Zhongli, Furina, Neuvillette, and of course Kazuha, you were able to easily push out 80k DPS per rotation on a Neuvillette team. Now I know to some of you, 10k might not seem like that big of a difference, but you need to remember, in Genshin's whole history, we've only just about doubled top team DPS, so 10k with 2 characters releasing is insanely high. And you need to remember that this was only for Neuvillette teams, because Furina was able to easily, at C0, stack full fanfare and give him a 100% damage bonus while healing him, while dealing off-field damage, while also, at the same time, easily stacking bonuses for the rest of the characters on the team. Not to mention double Hydro, which would proc and give him even more HP to scale off of. Neuvillette was a monster for all of Fontaine's meta, but we're not even done, because it didn't take long after Neuvillette released for a lot of people to figure out that because of his high slashing AoE attacks, Neuvillette can be spun in a circle. Now for a lot of characters, this isn't that big of a deal, and for normal people, we were too busy calculating the Pythagorean theorem to make sure that our big blue laser attack was going through the perfect angle to hit as many enemies as possible. But some people went full caveman brain, turned their sensitivity on their mouse up all the way, and just spun in a circle so fast that every single tick of Neuvillette's laser hit every single enemy for the whole floor of the spiral abyss. Needless to say, this is a very powerful and very valid strategy. So at this point, we have one of the easiest characters to build, with one of the highest DPS ceilings in the game in both single target and multi-target, one of the best artifact sets in the form of Meretrice Hunter, he heals himself, works with pretty much every character in the game, and pushed the DPS ladder much farther. What else could a DPS want? I know, how about a Xilonen? Thank God for Xilonen's release, finally making Neuvillette actually playable, because God knows he needed the buff. Xilonen Xilonen is like a side grade to Kazuha in the greatest extent of the word. While Kazuha buffs 40% damage with his passive talent and shreds res by 40% with an artifact set, Xilonen shreds res with her passive talent and buffs 40% damage with an artifact set, meaning that if you put the two of them on the same team, they are effectively doing the same job, except they stack. This means that as of right now, it is fully possible, hell, it is easy to do over 100,000 damage on a Neuvillette tick simply because of the release of Xilonen. She shreds res, she buffs damage with both her artifact set and her weapon. She heals, meaning she can help Furina stack fanfare quicker. Furina will easily stack her fanfare to max, increase health by the team by a significant portion, increasing Neuvillette's damage even more. Kazuha will shred res and buff Hydro bonus damage, increasing damage even more, while Neuvillette is the main hyper carry. You are literally immortal, and you deal the highest damage in the game when you use this team. Neuvillette excels in now AoE and single target content because of Xilonen's buff. He excelled before, but now he excels even greater. And that puts into question the next topic. How is he gonna fall? To put it mildly, we have two options from here, because every time a character ever in Genshin's history has received some sort of major buff, they receive some sort of major nerf, usually indirectly, such as Ganyu, who was excelling in multi-target content with the help of Morgana, which again, I talked about in a previous video. They nerfed her significantly by making her perform as Melt Ganyu, and while Melt Ganyu was strong in single target, it wasn't anywhere near as dominant as Morgana was in multi-target, and Ganyu as a whole caused a shift in the meta towards single target content simply to nerf her as a whole because she was too powerful. Raiden Shogun is another example, a unit who was very powerful for her ability to slot in on pretty much every team, but over time her personal damage has become very lackluster, and her utility has been performed by other people as accounts are able to build up their artifacts, and suddenly the use of a high energy recharge character isn't worth the DPS loss, so she ended up getting phased out. And we're starting to see the same thing happen to Alhaitham, because now Hyper Bloom simply isn't dealing as much damage as something like Neuvillette is. Again, that's not saying that any of these three characters are good, but that's essentially saying that in the past we have seen characters get neutered over time even though they're still very powerful. But that's not happening to Neuvillette. Neuvillette seems to be getting stronger as time goes on. And honestly, I don't know why. I can't give you any realistic way to nerf Neuvillette as a character because he quite frankly just excels in every single way. He's new player friendly, veteran friendly, easy to build, easy to master, can perform well in single target, multi-target, easy team comms, easy artifact set, and obviously he doesn't need a healer. The only thing I can see phasing Neuvillette out of the meta is just by increasing the scaling of future characters that release to make them overall the better option as a whole. But we'll see what happens. That's about it. See ya.